Welcome back to the world of rock and roll keyboards. My name is David Garfield, and I've had the pleasure of performing and recording with numerous rock and roll bands over the years. In Rock Keyboards number 1, we went over 12-bar blues, dominant 7th chords, and some basic rock licks and riffs. In this video, we're going to pick up where we left off, learn a few new types of chords, learn a few more scales and riffs for improvising, work on our skills playing with the group, and how to interact effectively with the guitar, bass, and drums. So let's make some noise. First of all, I'm going to show you some different chords, and I'll use these chords later in some of the examples. I'd like to start with the minor 7th chord. We're going to be in the key of A right now. The minor 7th chord is just like the dominant 7th chord that we learned, except the 3rd is now flatted or minor. Here's the root, A, the minor 3rd, which is C, in this case it's middle C, the 5th, which is an E, and the dominant 7th, which is a G. That's what a minor 7th chord sounds like. Those are all minor 7ths. The dominant 7th sounded like that. It's just one note difference. A good fingering for this is the thumb on the root, the index finger on the minor 3rd, the 4th finger on the 5th, and the pinky finger on the dominant 7th. Left hand can play the root for now. Now we need to learn that in a couple different keys. And there's different ways of voicing this. One of the most common ways that I like to voice a minor 7th chord is like that. It's a little more open, and on top I've got the 5th, then the minor 3rd, then the dominant 7th, then the root on the bottom. That's a very good starting position. I've got the thumb on the dominant 7th, the 3rd finger on the minor 3rd, and the pinky finger on the 5th. Down here I have the root. The minor 7th chord goes along with a scale that we're going to use for improvising. We're also going to use it for getting other combinations of notes and adding some notes to what we've just played. And this scale we call the Dorian mode. And what this scale is a G major scale, but starting on the 2nd position of that key, which is an A. So I'll give you the notes one at a time. A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, and A. Now the reason I'm showing you the scale now is because when I grab my chord voicings, I use notes from the scale. Like for example, with this basic chord we showed you, I might add that note in there, which is the 9th. That's a very common sound too, and we use that a lot. Basically the rule is you can grab any note in the scale in your chord voicing. But for right now, we'll just stick with the basic A minor 7 chord. Now that we know what a minor 7th chord is, let's learn it in another key. Okay, here's A minor. Now we're going to go to F sharp minor. We're going to use this in the next song, okay? The same chord in F sharp minor. First I'll give you the basic voicing. F sharp with the thumb, A with the index finger, C sharp with the 3rd finger, and E with the pinky. Left hand can play the root. That's an F sharp minor 7 chord. Now with the voicing that we showed you, 2nd voicing, a little more open. Root on the left hand, 7th with the thumb, minor 3rd with the index finger, and 5th with the 4th finger. Okay? It's an F sharp minor chord, and we're going to use that in the next song. I'd also like to introduce another type of chord. In rock music and contemporary music, we often use major chords without a 7th. But sometimes we don't want to just play a simple triad. Now this is what a triad sounds like. Just 1, 3, 5. Now, sometimes we like to add an extra note, like we'll add, for example, a 9th, or what they call a 2nd, because it's the 2nd note of the scale. So let's say on the E chord, we have an E chord, and what I would typically play is basically an E triad, but I would add that 9th. So let me show you the basic voicing. The right hand, thumb on the E, index finger on the F sharp, which is the 9th or the 2nd, the 3rd finger on the 3rd, the major 3rd, and the pinky on the 5th, left hand on the root. It's a very sweet, nice sound. And sometimes we can drop the 3rd and get a very open sound. Oh, and when we voice that up like that, it sounds real nice. Now that voicing has the thumb on the 2nd, which is F sharp, index finger on the 5th, which is B, and the pinky on E, which is the root. Left hand is on the root. That's a nice sound. We can add our 3rd back in. So that's a major chord with the added 9th or added 2nd. Let's take these new chords that we just learned along with the dominant 7th chord, and we'll go back with the band, start out with a basic blues-oriented groove, very similar to a song that I've performed live in concert with Boz Scaggs. That was something I call a swamp boogie. It's based on the 12-bar blues, but the form of this song is actually 24 bars. Once again, form is very important. You need to know where you are in the song. This song is in the key of A, but we're starting out on the 4 chord, which is a D7. 1, 2, 3, 4. Basically, we're using the same riffs from video number 1 when we're talking about rock and roll 12-bar blues. I'm going to take it a little step further because later in the song we're going to introduce the new chords. We do 4 bars of D7 and we go down to A7 for 4 more bars. And our little grace note in there. And we go back to D for 4 more, and then back down to A for 4 more. So that's a total of 16 bars now. Now we're going to go to the 5 chord, which this is one of the places that I can introduce the added 9. And then we go up to our F sharp minor 7 for 1 bar. And now we're going to go to a D added 9th. I'm using a little bigger voicing this time. For the added 9th chord, I'm using both a root and an octave up on my left hand. On the right hand, I'm using the thumb on the 5th, which is an A, index finger on the root, which is D, third finger on the 2nd or the 9th, which is E, and I'm going to put my pinky up there on the 5th. I can even add this note in if I want to, which is the 3rd, with my 4th finger. I make that a big chord because that's kind of the climax of the song. So starting from the 17th bar of the tune on the 5 chord, we're on E, F sharp minor, D add 9, 4 more bars of A. We're back to the top. Between the first video and this one, we've learned several different kinds of chords, rhythm patterns, and types of forms. So now let's talk about how to create your own parts. First, we fiddle around with different voicings and motifs until we find the right part that clicks in with the rest of the band. If the band's playing an 8th note feel and the guitar player's doing a part, for example, doing some kind of 5ths, power chords that's taking up a lot of room, I might do something up on top, you know. If he's going da 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 da, I might go. So the point of this is that the cue for finding a part is listening to what the other guys are playing in the band. That's how I find what I'm going to play. I don't really know until I hear what everybody else is doing, and I find my spot. Here are a few rules of thumb. 1, always play in time with the drummer. The drummer is your timekeeper, he's your metronome. As far as I'm concerned, he's the boss of the rhythm. And when you're playing with a good drummer, the time is going to be nice and steady. Listen to him for the pulse and the groove of the song. Especially listen to his hi-hat, because that's usually where they're going to play the most consistent rhythm, and the snare drum, which is going to play some backbeats usually. Number 2, try to complement the guitar part. Work around what he plays. In other words, if he's playing rhythmic, you might want to lay down pads or sustaining parts. Pads or whole notes or footballs, there's a lot of different names for them, but they're basically parts that ring. Like for example, in the key of A, with an A minor 7th chord, a pad might be. I'm actually adding the 9th in there as well. But the idea is that it's sustaining. So if the guitar player is playing something like some kind of a part like that that's rhythmic, you might want to go. I'm going to an E minor 7. I'm throwing in a few extra notes. I'm always trying to throw you a step further. But the point is, pads are sustaining type things, and they work well when the guitar is playing rhythmic. If he's playing sustaining type parts, you might want to find some staccato rhythm patterns. For example, if the guitar player is laying down something real loud, crunchy, with a lot of sustaining ring, you might even want to find a different sound that's going to cut through. You might come up with a part, like for example, we're in the key of C major. Maybe the guitar is going. So we call power chords. And I might want to find a part that's going to ring over that, and I might look for staccato or choppy, short phrases, rhythmic. And right now, I'm just playing a few different chords, a few different major chords over that root. We're going to get more into these kind of harmonies later in the video. But the point is, think rhythmic if the guitar player is taking up most of the space and he's sustaining. Sometimes the keyboards can support and reinforce the guitar part by doubling, in other words, playing the same thing that the guitar is playing, or a simpler part that contains the same phrases and rhythmic emphasis. Like on the boogie, Swamp Boogie, guitar is playing maybe a pattern. If he's playing all the eighth notes and I'm going to play with him, maybe I'll go. So I'm leaving every other eighth note open for him, but I'm playing in complete time with him, and I'm following his chord motion. I'm acting as a reinforcement, so it sounds actually like one player together. Also, it's important to be in tune harmonically with the guitar by listening to and checking out his voicings and patterns. I've learned some of my coolest voicings from the guitar players that I've worked with, and I've asked them, show me what you're doing there, what note, you know, and I've come up with some great combinations that are not typical to the keyboard. Often I'm asked by the guitarist, don't put a third in that chord, just play fifths, for example. The G. No thirds there. Also sometimes to not use a fifth. For example, one of the songs we play on tour with Los Lobotomies has a big guitar melody section, and I'm instructed specifically, no fifths in these chords. So I'll play, for example, on a D minor 7. It goes to C major, B minor. Those chords, there's no fifth in that. And that's a very open sound and makes the guitar player happy. Number 3, stay out of the way of the bass. It's very common to play the roots in octaves or fifths with the left hand, especially if you're playing by yourself. But with the bass player, this is the area he calls home. Be very careful to keep the left hand simple, not to let the lower notes sustain or ring too much, and to use the left hand as an extension of the right hand sometimes, adding more notes and a fuller range to the right hand voicings or part. Here's a couple examples of that. When you're playing, for example, A minor 7th chord, you might be used to playing these octaves in your left hand. Now when you're playing by yourself, you might use the pedal to let it ring a little bit. Now when you're playing with the bass player, you want to make sure that you don't cloud up that low register, so you might go. See the difference? They can tolerate a few little notes down there, but when you leave it ringing, which is fine when you're by yourself, it'll get in their way, and you'll be getting bad looks for them. The other thing about using two-handed voicing is using your left hand in conjunction with your right can be very effective. Like here's a minor 7th chord, and I'm just going to voice it up higher on the keyboard. I'm going to use two hands. And this is leaving the whole low range free for the bass player. And I use this quite a bit when I'm playing. Just so you can learn this voicing, all I'm doing is I'm playing the root with my 5th finger in my left hand, the 5th with my index finger, the dominant 7th with my thumb, and then I'm going to go root with this thumb, index finger on the minor 3rd, 4th finger on the 5th, and on the pink I'm going to play the minor 7th on top. Now, one of the other things we hadn't talked about is that you can always leave the left hand out sometimes. Sometimes it's important just to go and let these other guys have their parts. Once again, the keyboards have to fit in with the other players in the band, and it's a tricky job. Now let's learn a couple of more new chords. First, the major 7th chord. We'll start in the key of C. That's the root, that's the third, that's the fifth, and that's the major seventh. We call it the major seventh because it's the seventh position of the scale, of the major scale. That's a C major scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, root. And C major seventh. Let's learn in the key of F now. We'll be using this on the next song. Here's an F major 7. We've got our root, which is F with our thumb. We've got the third with our index finger, which is A. We've got the fifth with our third finger, which is C. And we've got the E natural, which is the major seventh with our pinky. Left hand, we're just going to play the root down low with one note. Okay, that's what we call a major seventh chord. It's a pretty sounding chord, but it can be used in conjunction with other chords that are more dark sounding, and we'll show that in the next song. Another chord I'd like to introduce that we're also going to use in the next example is the suspended chord. And there's a lot of different ways of describing this chord and naming it, but it has the basic sound. I'm going to show you in the key of D. The way I'm playing this right now is as an A minor seventh with a D in the bass. Now some people call these polychords, and we're going to introduce some polychords at the last number of this video. I like to think of it as an A minor 7 over a D, but I also think of it as a D suspended. The reason we call it suspended is there's no third, there's no real major or minor third in the chord. Another way of playing a suspended chord is like this. Root, suspended fourth and fifth. There's no third. Typically it will resolve to a third, but in the number we're going to use it just as a suspended sound for the 4 chord. And it's going to sound like that. Here's another voicing. Root, fourth, fifth, and root again. D, G, A, and T. It's a nice suspended sound. So I've shown you a couple different ways of playing that chord. Now we're going to do something I call example number 1. It's a minor blues, and it's using a major seventh, and it's using a suspended chord for the 4th, and it starts out with 8 bars of A minor 7. I'm doing kind of a nice little calming pattern. We'll come back to this after you hear the example. Then it's going to go to 4 bars of D suspended, or A minor 7 with D in the bass. Then it's going to go back to A minor 7 again for another 4 bars. Then it's going to go to an F major 7 for 1 bar. Then it's going to go to a G add 9. We talked about the add 9 chord earlier. In the key of G, I'm using actually this voicing, which is root and root with my left hand, the 9th or the 2nd, which is the A with my thumb, the 3rd with my index finger, which is the B, D, which is the 5th with my 3rd finger, and then the root on top. It's going to play the G add 9 chord for 1 bar, and then it's going to go back to 2 bars of A minor 7. Let's go back to the stage now, join the rest of the band, and we're going to play this song, and we're going to use some of these new chords that we've learned. was a cool little groove. It was based on a minor blues, but the form of that tune was 20 bars. And we've done 24 bars, we've done 12 bars. Now this is 20 bars. It was 8 bars on A minor 7, 4 bars on the D suspended, 4 bars on A minor 7, 1 bar of F major 7, 1 bar of G, add 9, and then 2 more bars of A minor 7 on the end before we went back to the top. Now when we were playing, I was improvising, and I was using some of the things we talked about in video number 1, the blues scale. Now we're in the key of A now, so I'll give you the blues scale in A. A, C, D, E flat, E, G, A. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Those are the same notes. I'm just putting them in different orders, you know, based on things I've heard and things I've played. And also, I use something called the pentatonic scale. The pentatonic scale means 5 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a little simpler than the blues scale. It's similar, but this works for creating patterns. And I use a lot of patterns when I play. They're not so preconceived, but they're things that I make up, and I encourage you to make up your patterns. Here's the pentatonic scale in the key of A. 1, minor third with the second finger, 4th with the third finger, 5th with the 4th finger, and 7th, dominant 7th, with the 5th finger. So we're playing in A minor 7. Only using those 5 notes. And you can come up with patterns like I'm just kind of making up some stuff to show you the example. Besides the pentatonic scale and the blues scale, let's talk about the Dorian mode again. This is a good scale for improvising in a minor key. In the key of A minor, like we talked about before, it's A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, and A. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The fingering is thumb, 2nd, 3rd, thumb, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Back to the top. Now this scale gives us 7 notes to choose from when we're improvising. And you can make up patterns off of this or just improvise melodies. For example, how am I going to improvise a melody if I don't know what notes to pick from? So this gives me a good starting point. I'm in A minor. There's your Dorian mode. That's what it sounds like. It's kind of a nice sound. It's got the regular 6th in it. Mix it up with some blues scale. So these are some of the tools you can use to improvise and jam on, especially on a minor chord. Please play along with the tape. Check out what I did. I did a little solo in A minor. I used some of these same ideas. And seek out other records. Find something that's got a vamp in one key, one minor key, and experiment around. Use the pentatonic scale. Use the blues scale. Use the Dorian mode. Learn them in other keys too. I suggest learn them in all 12 keys. But maybe each week try a new one. That's a good way to go. And practice a little bit every day. Like we talked about before, it's very important if you're serious about playing to seek out a private teacher and take lessons and practice. And go out and see live musicians, watch what they do, buy CDs and tapes and videos, and most of all, play your instrument and don't be afraid to try to express yourself. Well, we've come to the end of this session, and between the first tape and this one, we've covered a lot of ground. We've learned all the basic chords and scales that are used in rock and roll. We've talked about the importance of listening to the other members of the band and how to interact with them. In this last piece, we're going to use some of the things we've learned, such as minor seventh chords, major seventh chords, major chords with the added ninth, and polychords. We talked about them earlier, but I have not shown you some of these particular voicings. I'll give you a hint. It's a major triad with a different note in the bass. See if you can figure it out. Remember, the best way to teach yourself is to use your ears and eyes and learn from other, more experienced players. I hope to see you all again, and good luck, and keep making music.